you'll take out your study for tonight. They're all leaving at the best part. All right. The last several weeks we were looking at the causes of fear. Tonight we're going to look at the effects of fear. And we'll just be looking at one of them. There's at least 5, and I hope that it'll be an encouragement to you. This section should motivate us. The segment that we'll be doing after this series, that is after the effects of fear, will be the remedies for fear. And that's kind of the one that we've probably been waiting for the most, because we all have to deal with fear, and all of us have different types of fear. And hope that it will really help us. Tonight, we're going to be looking primarily at the first one, and that is distraction. Distraction. The distraction of mind in duty. So the distraction that takes place in our minds when we have something that we should do, but it causes us to fear. And as I mentioned before, there's a little book by John Flavel that has been our study guide for this, and it's been very, very, very encouraging, very insightful. And letter A says, great fear puts our minds in a hurry and distracts us to such an extent that we cannot perform any service for God with a good outcome or comfort. Have you ever noticed how if you really are fearful about something, it tends to dominate your mind, and you find a hard time really concentrating on other things? And depending on how much fear it causes, it may cause you to become flustered, trying to think, and yet you can't think. You're hurried in your thoughts. And that's what he's talking about here. And it's said that the Latin word tumultus, which is where we got our English word tumult from, consists of timor, which is from, we get our word timid, or timorous from that, and the word multus, which is much. And so much fear creates great tumult in the soul. And I'd like you to turn to Luke chapter 1, and we'll see actually where the Bible speaks of this. And this happens to be during Zacharias, his prophecy in the child that they're going to have, and how that child will intersect with the Son of God. But notice in verse 74, it says, to grant us that we, being delivered from the hand of our enemies, might serve without fear. And so the connection there is we will be delivered from the hand of our enemies, which we fear. There's a natural fear there. But you will deliver us from that so that we might serve him, that is our God, without fear. You remember the soldiers of Israel were kind of quaking in their sandals as they watched Goliath. And yet, when David went out there, he was not shaking in his sandals. He had a much different perspective. In fact, I don't even think there was a thought of fear when he went up against Goliath, to be honest with you. And I know that maybe that seems idealistic to some, but I don't think he was either putting on a show of courage. It wasn't an act that, well, I've got to be courageous now as I go out against Goliath. I don't think David even thought it was courageous. I don't think he even thought of courage because he thought, how can I lose with God on my side? This is no contest. What did he have to be afraid of? And in fact, I'd like you to turn to Psalm 27. And look at verse 1. The Lord is my light and my salvation. The logical conclusion is what? Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. The logical conclusion. Of whom shall I be afraid? And that is what I believe David had in his mind. What did he have to be afraid of? He couldn't figure out why there weren't 100 other soldiers lined up to go out and battle Goliath. And it wasn't because he thought he was big stuff. It's because he truly had his focus on the Lord. He didn't see anything special in his strength or ability. All he saw was how strong and powerful and wise and present God was. And that's what he put his focus on. And when we do that, and when we have that kind of a relationship with the Lord, we can experience that as well. I'd like you to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And this is kind of an unusual context for talking about this matter of fear, but I think we can identify with this. Verse 25, we'll start there. He says, now concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. I suppose, therefore, that this is good because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. I want you to notice that present distress. And then he goes on, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. But this I say, brethren, the time is short, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. Those who weep as though they did not weep. Those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice. Those who buy as though they did not possess. And those who use this world as not misusing it, for the form of this world is passing away. I want you to notice in this passage up to that point, he really gives several things. Not just marriage, but he even talks about weeping and rejoicing, and those who own land or property or whatever, that they should be as though they had none. And what is the reason for that? Well, he says two things. He says because of the distress, and then he says for the form of this world is passing away. And earlier, maybe it's later here, let me read on in verse 32. But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the world, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. Now, what does he mean by care? Okay, priority. Okay. I think there's another word maybe that probably is more central, and that's a good thought. And that is the idea of care, meaning worry. It weights you down with distraction. For instance, he goes on and he says this, verse 34, there's a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, and that you may serve the Lord without distraction. So he establishes from the beginning that this, if you marry, you haven't sinned. If you don't marry, you haven't sinned. But he says he's recommending this because of the present distress, because of the distraction that these other cares can be, whether it be property, whether it be a husband or a wife. And why would I be, what is the distress that he's talking about? What do you think it would be? Some kind of persecution. So what would we be worrying about with our families? Okay, are they safe? That's your distraction. I mean, when you were single, that really wasn't a worry, was it? No. You would, even now, if you were single, there would be maybe some things that you might try or do that you wouldn't do with a family. And Paul here is speaking just from the standpoint strictly of looking at your life and saying, okay, think about this now. And because these things give a distraction to you and you worry about them. If you have investments, you're worried if something happens to the economy. If you have a lot of things, they strap you down. You've got to keep them up. Okay? And then if you have a husband or wife, you have to care for that person. The Lord says if a husband or if a man doesn't take care of the needs of his family, he's what? Worse than an infidel. So Paul is simply saying this, and I want to, because he uses the word distraction here, and the idea is these things cause us, they're a greater responsibility. They cause us to be concerned and worried about things that we normally wouldn't be worried about if we were single. We could leave and go to the other side of the world. We could, just because we have that freedom. And so, as a husband, there are things that I wouldn't do because I have a responsibility to take care of my family. Therefore, I don't take unnecessary risk. Now, think for a moment. Let's take the Ten Booms. Corrie Ten Boom's family, the father, the mother, the daughters. The dad, and I'm assuming the mother together, made a conscious decision to do what?
To hide that she was at risk, knowing there was risk.
Yes.
The family could be harmed, killed.
They knew that was a definite risk for their entire family, not just the mom and dad. But that was a risk that they were willing to take in order to please God, because they felt that anything else would have been, they would have suffered from a guilty conscience. And they would rather die than turn these people away, knowing that they were going to be murdered. And they would be allowing fear that was purposely instilled by the Nazis. They would be allowing fear to keep them from helping the Jews, which is the intent. That was the intent, to strike people with fear so they would follow. But by doing that, they would have felt like they would have been accomplices in what the Nazis were doing. So all I'm putting before us is I'm pointing out that, yes, even as a married person, if you are leading your family, there may be times where you have to purposely lead them into danger in order to please God. And that's not an easy decision to make. Letter B is, it is impossible to serve God without distractions until we can serve Him without the slavish fear of enemies. Now, notice he didn't say without enemies. He said without the slavish fear of enemies. The reverential fear of God is the greatest inspiration to duty and the best help in it, especially when facing danger. So again, the Ten Booms, I'm sure there was some fear involved. They were dreading that day when the Secret Service would show up at their door. But nevertheless, they went through with it. And that's because they feared God more than they feared the Nazis. They knew, they felt in their hearts, and their whole family followed. Their whole family, which means that Mr. Ten Boom had been leading his family well, because these were all adult children. Number two, the distracting fear of enemies will divert us from our duty, thereby destroying its comfort and benefit. And the devil's hindrance of comfortable fellowship with God is a deadly snare. And as we serve God, oftentimes the devil will surprise us with sudden danger. It could be the danger of slander. It could be the danger of maybe the economy going down and our fearing that we won't have enough to retire on. And those fears kind of knock us off of our foundation of trust in God. They can. And the element of surprise is very important to Satan's strategy, isn't it? That's why throughout life, when we face things, many of the things that we face surprise us. And he, that is Satan, knows where we are most vulnerable to fear. It could be our children, our reputation, our health, our risk of death, our security for the future. Think about, I mentioned surprise. Think about Job. And it was not only the element of surprise, it was how quickly one happened on the other. It was like one wave right after another that just, you can imagine how difficult that was. And that is why a continuous close relationship with God is so important to maintaining our defense against sinful fear. Because God is never surprised. He's never surprised by anything that goes on. In fact, He's using the same circumstances as Satan to build us up and teach us more about faith. I'd like you to turn to 1 Peter 4:12. And we're going to focus in on something about this verse. But really, this is exactly what Peter is trying to teach us when he says, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, verse 12, "Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. But rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you also may be glad with exceeding joy." Now, when he says, don't think it's strange, I want you to think about that in the sense of surprise, or in the sense of, I shouldn't be going through this. You know, I've lived for the Lord. I've really been trying to follow the Lord. And you're not to think of it as strange. You know, you're to treat the trials as a friend, as a good thing, rather than an alien who is there to mess up your life or your plans. Satan wants to rob us of our joy and our faith, not our salvation. When I say faith, I'm not talking about our salvation, but our faith in the midst of trials. And he wants to rob us of our faith in God's goodness, or his ways, or his love for us, or his wisdom. You've heard the proverb, when it rains, it pours. What does that mean?
Sometimes it gets, instead of when something happens, instead of you look for it to smooth out, two or three other things just come on top of the
Okay.
one thing that you think, oh, this is an individual trial. No, three other things happen at the same time.
Yeah. Some of you could give illustrations of that personally. And probably there have been times in all of our lives where we've felt that way to some degree, but I know even over the last year and a half to 2 years, you know, that has been the case. And it seems that when something bad happens that is not according to our plans, and that's when I use the word bad now, I'm using it in the context of what our mentality is at the time. There are often other undesirable things that follow on its heels. And when you have one thing happen and then you have another and another, it can overwhelm us. I'm saying it can. I'm not saying it has to, but it can. And all of us are subject to that. We're susceptible to that. And before long, it can just bowl us over. And it's not that all of them are of equal intensity or even getting worse and worse. It's just a matter of the amount or the number of them, even though some of them may be less serious than others. And so our faith can begin to shake under the weight of it all. And so here he says, beloved, and I was kind of stopped in my tracks just by the word beloved, because it's emphasizing that he cares. And I know this is Peter speaking, but he's speaking through the Holy Spirit, and he says, beloved, don't think it strange concerning the fiery trial. And this word strange is an interesting word. The word literally means to be a host for a stranger. In other words, you've got your day all planned out, and you hear the doorbell ring, and you go to the doorbell, or you go to the door, and you find somebody there that maybe is from out of town and you weren't expecting them, and they're saying, "Hey, and we're here to visit you." And all of a sudden, your whole plans change. You're thinking about what's the house look like, but you may be glad to see them, and so he's saying that strange guest, and maybe it's even more different if you have a true stranger that shows up for some reason, and you feel that it's your responsibility to take care of them. So in this case, the strange guest is who? What is the strange guest? The trial. So do not think it strange concerning this trial that's come into your life, that it's not, you need to treat it not as a strange thing, but rather as something that God has allowed to come into your life for your good. And so we shouldn't be surprised by this trial, but rather we should expect these strangers to come into our lives. And that's what it means to not be surprised by it. The word, there are actually two words. And the first word that's used for strange means go to Hebrews 13. Hebrews chapter 13. And we're going to find another place where this exact same word is used. So in Hebrews 13:2, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some have unwittingly entertained angels. Now the word entertained here is used twice. The first time it's used, it means hospitality. And it's not even a verb, it's actually a noun. So he says, don't forget hospitality to strangers. For in so doing, some have unwittingly entertained, and this is the same word that's used in 1 Peter 4:12. It's not the angels, but it's entertained. And so he's saying some have actually entertained strangers, which turned out to be angels. And so, what's the reason we should entertain strangers? Do not forget to entertain strangers. Now, if you just left it there, that would be one thing. But then, what is the reason why we are to entertain strangers? They might be angels. Now, the application of that, when we put this together with the previous verse, is simply this: entertain strangers, entertain trials, because those trials are actually blessings. They're angels in disguise. And the important thing to remember, we were talking about this in our family devotion several weeks ago, and I don't remember which verse we were on, but I asked Jordan, what does this mean? And he said, well, the trial can be used by Satan, and the trial can be used by God. And Satan wants to use it to trip us up. God wants to use it to teach us to live by faith and to trust Him. And so the strange guest in this passage is literally an an angel who shows up at our door. And do you remember anybody in Scripture that happened to? Yeah, Abraham. And Lot did as well. So the exhortation is to be hospitable to strangers. But this principle is there that we need to look at it as God's sovereignty in bringing into our lives what is best. Welcome this trial into your life because, and this goes back to chapter 4 of 1 Peter, he says, "Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed," and what is that talking about? When his glory is revealed. Yeah, it is coming. You may also be glad with exceeding joy. And I suppose that this, you could even broaden it a little bit and say that it's talking about when you have acted on faith, that you will be glad. It's like Abraham when he sacrificed Isaac. That was a very difficult thing to do. But after it was done and the Lord stayed his hand and he said, "Now I know that you fear me and that you love me more than you love even that son that I gave you to fulfill the promise." I'm sure Abraham was grateful that he had obeyed the Lord. And there was great joy that came from that, and that's what will happen to us as well. I want you to, so what we're saying in essence is that those circumstances, we're to look at them very differently. We're to look at them in faith and see that God is working in our lives. I wanted to read to you a portion from this book. It's actually called An All-Round Ministry, and it's by C.H. Spurgeon. And these are messages that he preached to his preacher boys that he was sending out into the ministry. And he said this: "Faith leads us to believe in difficulties being overruled to promote success." Do you hear that? Faith leads us to believe in difficulties being overruled to promote success. Because we believe in God and in his Holy Spirit, we believe that difficulties will be greatly sanctified to us and that they are only placed before us as stepping stones to grander results. We believe in defeats, my brethren. We believe in going back with the banner trailed in the mire, persuaded that this may be the surest way to lasting triumph. We believe in waiting, weeping, and agonizing. We believe in a non-success which prepares us for doing greater and higher work for which we should not have been fitted unless anguish had sharpened our soul. We believe in our infirmities and even glory in them. We thank God that we are not so eloquent as we could wish to be and have not all the abilities we might desire, because now we know that the excellency of the power shall be of God and not of us. Faith enables us so to rejoice in the Lord that our infirmities become platforms for the display of his grace. Brethren, we believe that even our enemies shall, in God's hands, subserve our highest interest. They are yoked to the car of God. Perhaps of all the powers which affect the divine purposes in the world, no one does more than the devil himself. I want you to think about that. Satan has a purpose in all these trials as well. This is the next sentence. He is but a scullion in the Eternal's kitchen. Scullion is was a mop. And a mop does all the dirty work. And so he says, Satan is but a scullion in the internal's kitchen. He unwillingly performs much work to which the Lord would not put his own children. Work which is just as needful as that which seraphim perform. Believe not that evil is a rival power of equal potency with the good God. No, sin and death are, like the Gibeonites, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the divine purposes. And though they know it not, when the Lord's enemies rave and rage most, they fulfill his eternal purposes to the praise of the glory of his wisdom and grace. So, we need to review those truths in our minds as we go throughout our lives, and especially in times of trial. John Flavel said this, "I do not doubt that it is one of the devil's great designs to keep us in continual fear and alarm, and to puzzle our heads and hearts with 1,000 difficulties, which will probably never come upon us. Even if they do, they will never prove as fatal as we imagine. He does this to unfit us for present duties and to destroy our comfort in them." And that brings us to letter C. If Satan can distract our thoughts through fears, he gains 3 advantages to our unspeakable loss. Number 1, he severs us from the freedom and sweetness of communion with God. Because, friends, when we are in a state of fear, we can't really have fellowship with God except as we repent of that fear and we come to him for help. The best duties become an empty shell when fear, like a worm, eats away at them. One of the church fathers of the past, John of Damascus, said this about prayer. Prayer is the ascension of the mind or soul to God, but distraction clips its wings. And whoever lacks possession of his thoughts never offers up his soul to God. The life of communion with God in prayer consists in the harmony that is between our hearts and words, and both with God's will. And distraction, which is what we're talking about tonight, spoils that harmony. Whoever lacks possession of his thoughts never offers up his soul to God. And then number 2, he severs us from the support and relief it should draw from God's promises. When the Israelites were in bondage, their minds were distracted with fears and sorrows, and they didn't regard the supporting promises of deliverance that Moses brought them. And I'd like you to turn to Exodus 6. And notice verse 6. This is the Lord speaking. Therefore, say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So he was making a promise here to them. He was actually promising them that he was going to bring them out of the land of Egypt. And But look at verse 9. So Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moses because of anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. Their circumstances were severe, but their circumstances kept them from actually trusting the Lord's promises. And then in verses 10 and 11, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the children of Israel go out of his land. And notice verse 12, and Moses spoke before the Lord, saying, The children of Israel have not heeded me. How then shall Pharaoh heed me? For I am of uncircumcised lips. And so now Moses, because the children of Israel were not listening to him, and then the Lord says, you go tell Pharaoh to let us go. And he's saying, Lord, even the children of Israel won't believe me. How do you expect Pharaoh to believe me? But notice what the Lord's answer is. Verse 13, Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a command for the children of Israel and for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. And he said, go back to both of them and tell them that to bring my children out. And that is what he did. But the point I'm making is simply this, that Moses kind of got discouraged because the children of Israel wouldn't listen to him. And when we fear, when we don't go on God's promises, what we do is we sever ourselves from those promises and the faith that it ought to instill in us. So the Lord kept just saying, go and tell them. And he reiterated that this is a promise. Think about David. You remember David was given a promise, and what was that promise? Okay, he would be king. He was going to be king. And that came from the prophet, it came from the Lord. The kingdom would be his. It included deliverance from Saul's hand and all his attempts to destroy David. But even so, when he was faced with those trials, there were times where he reacted sinfully, meaning that he forgot or he did not believe. In fact, it says he was afraid, and that fear undermined the support of the promises that he had been given by God himself. And he even went to the extent where he said, I shall now perish on this day by the hand of Saul. He said that in 1 Samuel 27:1. He also declared in Psalm 116:11, all men are liars, which would have included Samuel, who had assured him that the kingdom would be his. And that's always the nature of fear. It makes people distrust the very promises of God that ought to give us great hope. It ought to save us from the imminent danger. And so, when we are unbelieving, we're suspicious of those promises that ought to be our very chief encouragement. Our fears will render us unfit for prayer, and they will also shake off the credit of God's promises. Flavel put it this way, the damage to us is so great that it would be better to lose our two eyes than to lose such advantages in trouble. And then number 3, he severs us from the comfort that is found in our past experiences and the relief that God's faithfulness and goodness imparted in former straits and dangers. So we give so much attention to people and dangers that we forget God, even the God who preserved us when the enemy was ready to devour us. Turn to Isaiah 51. And look at verse 7 and following. It says, this is the Lord speaking through the prophet. He says, listen to me, you who know righteousness, you people in whose heart is my law. That could be every one of us here. Do not fear the reproach of men, nor be afraid of their insults. For the moth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will eat them like wool. But my righteousness will be forever, and my salvation from generation to generation. Now, what he just said in those two verses was, listen to me, you that are my people. Don't fear these other enemies, because they'll be like a moth, or like a garment that's eaten like a moth. And he compares them to this, and he says, but my righteousness will be forever. I will be here forever, and my salvation from generation to generation. Now look at what he says. Verse 9, awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the ancient days, in the generations of old. Are you not the arm that cut Rahab apart and wounded the serpent? Now who's he talking about when he mentions Rahab and the serpent? I think we mentioned this several weeks ago. That's another word for Egypt, Rahab is. And the serpent was the symbol of Egypt. Many of the pharaohs, you remember their turbans had a serpent on it, a serpent's head. And so he's saying now, he makes this promise to him, and then he says, it'll just be like, do you remember what happened back there? Just like we're to remember what God has done in the past for our lives. We're to bring those things back and remember them as an encouragement to our faith. And then he goes on, are you not the one, speaking of God, are you not the one who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, that made the depths of the sea a road for the redeemed to cross over? He's talking about what there? The Red Sea. So the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy on their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, sorrow and sighing shall flee away. I, even I, am he who comforts you. Hilarious. Who are you that you should be afraid of a man who will die and of the Son of Man who will be made like grass? And you forget the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundation of the earth. You have feared continually every day because of the fury of the oppressor when he has prepared to destroy. And where is the fury of the oppressor? He goes back in the past. Friends, he could do that with each of us today as well. He could go back and he could say, didn't I provide the money you needed then? Or didn't I provide for your physical needs? Or didn't I answer your prayer about your son or daughter? I mean, just thing after thing where God is faithful. And the Lord is teaching us about fear here and how we're to respond to it, not let our fears control us. And I want you to notice verse 15 and 16 as we close this passage. But I am the Lord your God who divided the sea, whose waves roared. The Lord of hosts is his name, and I have put my words in your mouth. I have covered you with the shadow of my hand, that I may plant the heavens, lay the foundations of the earth, and say to Zion, you are my people. That's what he says to us. You are my people. He's saying, I did this out of love for you. And then our distracting fears cut us off from all God's sweet reliefs when we need them most. We are so bound up by our fear of danger that we can't even think of what He's done in the past for us. And sometimes it takes somebody else, and whether it be a husband or wife, maybe one is discouraged or whatever happened in their life, and it takes somebody else to say, honey, don't you remember what God did back then? And suddenly you're kind of encouraged by that, and you realize that you really were not keeping your eyes on the Lord. And our faith seems ludicrous when our fears are in control, because they're distracting us from seeing God in the situation. And that's what we need most, is we need to be encouraged by God's word, and we need to believe in the trial that God is in it. Well, let's pray. Father, we thank you for the word of God that exhorts us and preaches at us and helps us to get our thinking straightened out, helps us to get our faith focused back on you. And Father, may the Word of God dwell richly in us so that we can bring your Word up to us, so that the Word will be in our hearts and our minds. And may we find ourselves praying those promises back to our great God. Help us, Lord, not to be distracted by our fears, but help us, Lord, to have our eyes fully upon you. In Jesus' name.